to make sure it's right. Some of you do. Most people don't. Most people look at their bank statement and they look for the big amounts that they spend and think, what the heck did I spend that on? Or they look at who they spent money with. Yeah, I remember I went to Debenhams, I remember I did this, I remember I did that. Not many people actually check every single entry on their bank statement. And that can be dangerous because somebody might have duplicated your card and they might be taking out £5 here and £4 here, and if you only look at the big amounts, you'd never notice that. It might be the bank have made charges on you, because banks do that every so often. Administration charges or whatever they want to call it. And if you don't check your bank statement and don't reconcile it, then you could be charging you odd amounts left, right and centre and you would never notice. It's dangerous enough in private life, it's more difficult in business. If you've got no money in your bank account on a Friday night, in your personal account, then you stay at home for the weekend and you watch Strictly and you watch the X Factor and you don't spend any money. But if you've run out of money in business on a Friday night, you're closed on Monday morning. You can't trade anymore. So it's essential that you know your records are correct, and it's essential that you verify that with the bank on a regular basis. And if there is a difference, you have to reconcile it. It may be, for example, that you say you're overdrawn by £161 and you go online and the bank says you're £239 in credit. Your first reaction might be, "Ooh, I never knew I had that money, I'll go out and blow it." Instead of saying, why are they different? The bank says 239 credit, you say 161 debit. And if you check it, you will find the reason for that is because that last cheque that you wrote for £400, you've put it in your cash book, but the bank haven't processed it yet. And when they process it, you'll also be 161 overdrawn. But if you happen to have spent that 239 because you thought it was boxy money, you're in trouble. Similarly, on the petty cash side, we've said we put £30 in, and we started with £20.53, and we've taken £22.27 out, so we've now got £28.26 in the petty cash box. That's what your petty cash book says. How could you check that one? Count it. Open your box, count the money, and if there's £28.26 in it, your records are right. If there isn't £28.26 in it, something's gone wrong. You may have forgotten to put a transaction into your cash book when you put money into the box or took money out. So you need to tie it in. Again, you need to check every entry and make sure it's right. It might be that your petty cash box fell off the table onto the ground and burst open and all the money rolled all over the place and you thought you'd collected it all. If you're only a penny out, or maybe even 5 pence, suppose you counted your petty cash box and you had £28.31 in there. Most people would probably take 5 pence out and stick it in their pocket and forget about it. And if you were 5 pence under, you'd go into your pocket and put 5 pence in rather than chase it. Me, I'm an anal old accountant, I would try and find all that money. I wouldn't cheat on the system. I'd spend hours trying to find 5 pence. But if it's very small amounts in petty cash, then put money in and take money out. But if it's excuse me, if it's big amounts, you've got to check it because it means something has gone wrong. You should always check it. So ignore what I said about just putting money in and out. But as long as you can confirm your records are correct with the bank, you know exactly how much you've got in the bank and the bank agrees with it. And with petty cash, you know how much you've got in your box and you've counted it. Then you know the financial situation of your business. And that's the important issue here. So that's a typical small business. A typical type of transaction that's going to take place. Yours won't be exactly the same, but they'll be similar. And as long as you look at the financial transactions and say, one, is this to do with the bank account, the cash book, or is it to do with petty cash? And two, is it money coming in or is it money going out? And then you just fill in the appropriate places, total them up at the end of the month, verify them in any way you can, and then move on to next month. Anybody got any problems with that one? Wait to see what happens when it starts for you. So that's the cash book and the petty cash pot. We now want to look at the sales and the purchases of your business. So we've got a sales ledger there, which records the date a transaction took place, details of the transaction. That might be who you sold it to, or it might be what you sold. It's up to you what record you keep. A reference number so you can tie in some evidence for that transaction if you ever get a tax inspection. And then the amount of money that's involved. And then when your customer pays you, you can fill in these two columns. That might be at the same time, it might not be. We've not included value added tax here at all. I don't want to confuse the issue. So I've not included VAT. But in some businesses with a value added tax, you would need to keep another column for the amount of VAT that's involved in the transaction. We've then got the purchase ledger, which again records similar information. The date, the details of the transaction, the amount of money, and those two columns get filled in when you pay your supplier. So let's have a look again at an example of this. Page 4 of the workbook says Angela has kept a record of her sales and purchases for the month. So let's look at the sales first of all. On the 2nd of the month, Mr. Brown, we made a sale to Mr. Brown. We've called it Proposal 1 for this exercise, and it was for £50. So we go to the sales ledger and we stick that in. 2nd of the month, Mr. Brown, this reference number 111 is just a reference I've given it. You would have your own referencing system. Most businesses start at 1 and just continue up for the year. Some businesses have different codes because they want to keep a record of different types of sales. For example, it may be a hairdressing salon you have. You might want to keep a record of the hairstyling, and you might want to keep a separate record of the products that you sell. So you might have the styling is A1 and the products is B1, and you just keep it separate like that. It's your choice, it's your reference. And then we've got the total amount of money, £50. We cannot fill in these two columns because we don't know whether Mr. Brown's paid us or not. That will get filled in when we verify he's paid us. The next transaction in date order is down in the purchases side. On the 2nd of the month, we bought some goods from Spicer's Stationery for £140.50. So we go to the purchase ledger and we fill that in. 2nd of the month, Spicer's Stationery, £140.50. In this case, we can fill in these two columns. Because if you go back to page 2, the very first transaction you had there was on the 2nd of the month, we wrote a cheque to Spicer's Stationery for £140.50. So we actually paid that bill when we got the goods. So we can fill in the fact that it's been paid. This is us delving into something called double entry bookkeeping. I'm not going to confuse you too much. We run a basic bookkeeping course which looks at double entry bookkeeping. If you want to come to that, great. All I will say at this session is double entry bookkeeping has been on the go for over 400 years. Almost every software package that's out there is based on double entry bookkeeping because it catches mistakes. Double entry bookkeeping, as the name suggests, 2 entries. For every single transaction, you make an entry in one ledger and you also make an entry in another ledger. In this particular case, we made an entry in the purchase ledger to say that's paid. We also made an entry in the cash book to say we've taken £140.50 out of our bank. And that's how double entry basically works. I'm not going to confuse you today. If you want to find out more about it, come along to the bookkeeping workshop. The next transaction is actually not on page 4 at all, it's also back on page 2. It says on the 3rd of the month we received a cheque from Mr. Brown for £50. So we made an entry into the cash book to say £50 was deposited in our bank. The other half of that double entry shows that Mr. Brown has settled that bill. Everybody okay with that? Okay, another little exercise to do on sales and purchases. So once again, I'll give you a blank sheet. Do you want a blank sheet? Are you okay with that? The simplest way to do this exercise is actually on page 4, go down all of the sales entries and put them in, put them into, so go down all of the sales entries on page 4 and put them into the sales ledger. Remembering you can only put them into the first 4 columns. And then go to the purchase ledger and go through all the entries, putting them into the first 3 columns. Then you have to go back to page 2 and you have to look at what has been paid. And you can score it off in the received or paid column. Okay? So just put all the sales entries into the sales ledger in the first 4 columns, put all the purchases into the first 3 columns of the purchase ledger, and then go back to page 2 and see if any of the money that's changed hands relates to any of these specific transactions, in which case you can fill in the last 2 columns.